Good morning and welcome. I'm Mark Griffin, President and CEO of Lewis Drug, and we're here on a special day to introduce a governor's initiative for the safety and health care of the state of South Dakota, and we applaud her vision. At this point, I'd like to introduce the Secretary of Health.
Thank you. Good morning. It is good to be with you today. Thank you, Governor. Special thanks to Bill and Mark for inviting us and allowing us to have space here at Lewis Drug. Here that Lewis Drug has been since the 1950s, has had this place right here. So it's very fitting to have this discussion. My name is Melissa Magstead. I am privileged to serve as the Cabinet Secretary for the South Dakota Department of Health since late last year, and I've also been a healthcare provider in the great state of South Dakota for over 30 years. And my practice settings have been anywhere from healthcare systems to rural clinics to long-term care facilities, and I'm very much committed to promoting, protecting the public health of all South Dakotans. So we're here today to call attention to the nationwide medication shortage. Governor Noem will share some solutions in a moment, but I first want to talk to you about the problem that is at hand. In December of 2019, the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs received a report on the challenges healthcare providers were facing in getting medications for their patients based on the lack of availability. In that report, according to this, 80% of the active ingredients for generic prescription drugs sold throughout the United States come from foreign countries, primarily China and India. The report also acknowledged that there was a shrink in diversity in the supply chain and that the U.S. did not have the capabilities to rally response to any future disruption. And it also outlined that it was impossible to know where our pharmaceutical drugs are sourced from. That vulnerability continues to exist and has also gotten worse. Pharmacists here in South Dakota and across the nation, both inpatient and retail, are struggling under the massive federal failure. So this is not a new issue. Drug shortages have been growing over the last decade or so. What is new and progressively worsening is our reliance on single sources for our diversity of the drug supply chain. The U.S. no longer has the capabilities to manufacture our medications, especially our generic medications. In addition, the U.S. now competes with the entire globe for the same sources. China is the raw material holder, and India is the finished product manufacturer for the majority of generic medications for the entire globe. This is a problem, and this is a vulnerability that hit Main Street, South Dakota, even just this last December. From friends and families, and even to the littlest South Dakotans were impacted when even the simplest medication of amoxicillin was unavailable for months. The consumer cost savings of the generic drug market requires high volumes made at cheap prices. That's a huge benefit. However, the downside is that manufacturing these cheap generics has not been fiscally sound in the U.S., leaving the drug manufacturing work to be completed cheaply overseas. This isn't necessarily a bad thing when there's diversity in the sourcing. When the sourcing starts to become concentrated or located solely in one country, then there are concerns. The supply chain can collapse because of just one event at that point, whether it's an earthquake, a pandemic, or a company just going out of business. Every year during respiratory season, our little ones need amoxicillin for strep throat and ear infections, and I can tell you from personal experience that the cupboards were bare at our pharmacies for months this last season. Our pharmacists, working hard, could not dispense amoxicillin for months, the simplest of medications. Prescribers went to the next set of antibiotics, which quickly led to the shortage in those next medication supplies, as an example of one of the things and how it's impacting South Dakotans, all the way down to our littlest people. Pharmacists across the country, both retail and inpatient pharmacies, spend their days trying to find even small of amounts of medications to be able to dispense to their patients. They might tell patients to wait a few days until the next shipment comes in, or they may help find an alternative to the medications that was prescribed, even if it's not as effective. And sometimes, frankly, there is no alternative. This isn't right. My team and I spoke to pharmacists across the state, frontline people. One pharmacist stated, "We are far beyond being able to solve this on our own." Another seasoned pharmacist declared, "In my 42 years, I've never seen anything like this." And we've also heard from our inpatient pharmacists, what is new is how long these shortages are lasting and how many there are. And now There are so few companies that make generic medications that when one goes into bankruptcy, that company may have been the one and only manufacturer of that particular drug. But even if they weren't, the rest of the companies cannot respond to the demand that that loss created. In South Dakota, we step up and we rise up to challenges and we lead conversations. We have taken the information from the ground up, our pharmacists, our nurses, our prescribers, our patients, and prepared a report for Governor Noem to use to inform her decision making. And we thank the governor for being aware of this issue for us all, for caring about the people of our great state and leading the charge to providing solutions on behalf of us all. So it is my privilege and it's my honor to introduce to you the Honorable Governor of South Dakota, Governor Kristi Noem. Thank you.
Well, good morning. Thank you all for coming. This is a very important topic, which I'm grateful that you are here to learn about. I want to thank our legislators for coming, too. We have several of them here, and I know they're passionate about this issue and have been very involved in our healthcare industry and taking care of the people of South Dakota. Listen, Secretary Magstedt was the first person who brought the shortage to my attention, but it was long before she ever served as the Secretary of Health for the state of South Dakota. Several years ago, I toured some pharmaceutical manufacturers in the United States, found out about where their ingredients were coming from, the fact that we had very few facilities left in the United States and that we were relying on other countries such as India and China to generate a lot of the medications that people rely on. That's when I first learned that we could not be certain of ingredients that go into our medications, that they weren't toxic or contaminated when people received them to take care of their family members. And I became alarmed by what I saw happening in the United States of America. For me at that time, I recognized that it could be a national security issue to take care of the health of our people here in our state and in our country. Secretary Magstedt for the last year and a half has been texting me and talking to me and calling me about shortages that we've seen in South Dakota. She was the first one to passionately reach out to me and say something has to be done. And we started to do research. Listen, I'm not just the governor. I've served in Congress, but I'm also a mom. When Booker was born, he was a very, very sick little boy. In fact, he couldn't get through a day without albuterol, steroid treatments, breathing treatments on a daily basis just to help him breathe. Albuterol is one of the medications that we are extremely short on and was not available to many parents throughout this last winter season. I cannot imagine the fear that would have struck my heart, knowing that my little boy couldn't breathe unless I had a medication, and that medication was not available to them. We need to take action to make sure we're protecting our families, our children, that we have the ability to provide for them when a crisis hits their family as far as their health care goes. And that is why today in South Dakota, we're going to take action that we can take and call on Washington, D.C. to do more. Our Department of Health manages an inventory of medications and stockpiles them in case we have key shortages. I learned a lot about that cache of medications during the COVID pandemic, that they needed to be constantly recycled and stockpiled with things that we have a great need for in our state, but also that we need to continuously reevaluate that stockpile. Make sure it's medications that we're struggling to get and that it's people in our state need to have. This tool is utilized currently in Sioux Falls and Rapid City, and that's good. But there's unique challenges facing our communities that don't have readily accessible medications that they need on a day-to-day basis. So we're going to be expanding this supply and this stockpile to several other communities. Today I'm announcing that we will have a stockpile in 5 more communities, including Aberdeen, Mobridge, Hot Springs, Pierre, and Yankton. We've never, as a state, had a cache of medications stored in those communities. We will start doing that today. We will also be diversifying the type of medications that will be available to the public should a shortage occur and it become necessary to tap into the stockpile. There are antibiotics and other necessary medications that we've run into shortages with the last year and a half, and we are going to be adding to the stockpile albuterol, epinephrine, insulin, prednisone, and pediatric amoxicillin. We saw many times throughout the last year that also parents could go to a drugstore such as Lewis like this and find that they couldn't even get children's Tylenol for their children, that they couldn't get the needed prescription that they needed. These 5 new drugs that we will have in these caches will be available to parents should something like that happen. I'm extremely grateful to Mark and for Bill being here today and for helping to speak to this issue and to giving us the opportunity to talk about their real life experiences that they have with family members that are struggling with these shortages. We're blessed right now to be in the summer months where these drugs aren't in high demand, but we will get a supply that will prepare us for our winter months so that when the need arises, when we get into a difficult respiratory season or are dealing with other viruses that may come, that our families here in South Dakota will be taken care of. That's what we can do as a state on a short-term basis to make sure that we're doing what is right and responsible for our population. We can protect our people, but it's not the long-term solution. That's why today I'm also taking other action. I'm sending some leaders in Washington, D.C. a letter. I'm sending our congressional delegation an official letter that will ask them to take action on some of the things that need to be done to fix this problem permanently. I'm also sending it to the leaders of the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House from both the Republican and the Democrat Party, asking them to recognize this as a national security concern and to take action on behalf of the health of our public. I also am sending them a copy of our report that the South Dakota Department of Health has generated that identifies the problem and points specifically to the supply chain challenges that we have and the manufacturing challenges that we have. And then I also am sending this letter and information to the Commissioner of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. A lot of these problems are in the FDA, and they can take action today to relieve these problems. And hopefully with the pressure of some senators and some congressmen, the FDA will take that action today. What these letters say is it's urging them to take decisive, swift action to increase transparency in our supply chain, that we have long-term policy solutions that will bring new materials to a finished product, that we know where it's coming from and what kind of finished product we're going to have available to the public. They should act to increase diversity in the manufacturing of generic products and medications, that the FDA should be more transparent about shortages and events that would cause disruptions in that supply chain. The useful life of medications should be re-examined by the FDA to see if it's appropriate for medications to be stored for a little bit longer. That waivers should be provided to allow purchases of medications from Canada. That Canada is a much better place for us to be reliant on our medications than relying on countries such as China that seek to destroy us. Congress should create a more favorable regulatory environment to boost U.S. manufacturing, including shorter cure periods for U.S. manufacturing plants, and that Washington should require a risk assessment of foreign source active pharmaceutical ingredients. That's one of the biggest reasons why we're here today. These issues, if they were addressed in Washington, D.C. by our leaders and within the FDA, would fix our problem. It would identify where our ingredients come from. It would ensure that they are safe, that we do have a diversified supply chain, and that we could move some of this manufacturing back to the United States of America. South Dakota can take the action that we can take, but we need cooperation of all leaders that have the ability to weigh in on this issue to truly make a long-term difference. We need Congress and the FDA to be aware of the problem and the challenges and get them to step up and to act. Today I've asked Bill Ladwig if he would come forward. He is with Lewis Drug, and he's going to share some of his personal insight and wisdom to this challenge and what he's seen on the ground. And so, Bill, if you'd come up and share some of those, that information, I think it'd be extremely helpful.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the governor and secretary for honoring us with their presence and taking up this issue. I'm Bill Ladwig. I'm the senior vice president of Lewis Drug. I've been here a couple of years. I've seen a lot of familiar faces from basketball playing days and at the Y and other times too. So anyway, as a game set, Lewis Drug is headquartered in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. We have 61 stores in the tri-state area. 41 of them are located in South Dakota. We're the largest retail pharmacy chain in South Dakota, and with that, this store is our first store number 1 in Lewis Drug. So the reason, that's why we're here, we offered to hold the cash through the epidemic that occurred with H1N1, through different biological threat concerns. So there is the cash isn't held here, it's at our distribution center. We keep it there with our 61 stores that rotate stock, keep it fresh. The problem with pharmaceuticals, they expire every 2 to 3 years, and if you don't continue using it, you have to replenish them, reorder them, it gets expensive. So we do, Lewis Drug does our part in the eastern half of South Dakota, and then Dana Darger at Monument Health does the western part of South Dakota. So that is the genesis of where the cash came from. We're doing whatever we can to make sure that we keep continuity with the supply chain. As alluded to before with the governor succinctly, and Secretary mentioned the fact that there's been a concern with supply chain or interruption, and it's commoditization that's occurred across pharmaceuticals. And I don't think the public really understands what's happened to the price point. Oftentimes, the medication that's contained, the life-saving medication that was used, the plastic and shipping costs more than the medication does now. It's just become so inexpensive. The United States leads in the brand name manufacturing component. We're very innovative. It's just the generic side of this now has some holes in it. India, which is about 70% of our generic production, did a great job covering us through COVID and keeping the supply chain going. But also now we've got inspections going with the FDA, and there's just interruptions. The albuterol was a concern because one of the pharmaceutical companies went out of business, and they were the primary supplier. And if you have a child who has breathing concerns, the last thing that you do not want to have is albuterol at 2 o'clock in the morning. So amoxicillin, we have a warehouse, and we're dealing with the manufacturers across the whole world as part of a buying program, and we've asked manufacturers what happened with amoxicillin. I've still not got a good answer for that. There's no reason that should be the case. That being said, Lewis is here, and thanking everyone for taking attention. What can we do at state level? Well, we can raise our concerns, and I think that's our point here, is to make sure that we make Washington understand how critical this is going to be going forward. We've been very fortunate that our supply chain has not been interrupted to a larger extent than what it is, but it doesn't mean that we should not take notice. And I think that's what our effort here is to make sure that we're acknowledging that. And I see we've got a couple people here from the hospital side, and also Carrie Shandron's here from the Board of Pharmacy. So this is a community thing. This isn't a Lewis thing. This is a pharmacist being proactive about making sure that we're taking care of our patients. And I guess that's what our focus is. That being said, we're here to field the questions. I can't answer the hospital side. I know that's even more acute than what we have with the oncolytic agents and everything else. But that being said, thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. We also have Tom Johnson's here with Avera, which we appreciate them being here and being available to take your questions if you have any for them. Sarah is here as well as the lead pharmacist here at this facility, and she is a rock star as well. So thank you all for coming. I'd like to open it up to questions. If you have some questions for anyone that is up here, Secretary Megstad or Bill, who is an expert in a lot of this for many, many years, we've been reliant on for information. Let's go to questions.
Adding these 5 locations, the state needs to acquire property or partner with pharmacies in those towns to do this, like you have in Lewis.
Yeah, we've already come to an agreement with pharmacies and suppliers in those areas to facilitate the cash, and then that will be completely cycled in and out so that we don't hit expiration dates, to make sure that that medication is always available for the public.
Is that accessible to the healthcare side as well as retail?
What happens most of the time with the state stockpile is that when we become aware of a shortage that a pharmacy may be facing, or a supplier, or even a healthcare provider may face, is when that becomes available. There's certain triggers within the Department of Health that we can make that possible for people to access. So Secretary Meg said, I don't know if you want to share details about how that trigger works, but you can go ahead and share that if you'd like to.
Sure. We don't, and not reinventing a wheel. We've already got fantastic pharmacies that know how to rotate stock, know how to dispense medications to patients, and also maintain the high standards that it takes to dispense a medication correctly. So we rely on those experts to do so. And then we also rely on the boots on the ground to let us know when sort of shortages are happening or when that stockpile needs to be taken up. So, we don't take a top-down approach. We take down from the boots on the ground, bringing that information up to us, and we'll rely on that, as we have with the rest of the cash that's been in existence for probably 15, 20 years already. So, thank you.
Yeah, I think most pharmacists, if you would talk to them, or if you've talked to your family pharmacist, they will, at times if they're filling a prescription for you, will say that they don't have it, and they have to call around to other pharmacies and see where it would be available. Many times last winter, those pharmacists simply could not access the medication they wanted, the doctor wanted to give to their patient. They had to go to alternatives, less effective drugs that may be available and accessible, and it was a real challenge. Our goal today is, with these stockpiles in these communities, is that we prevent that as much as possible, especially these necessary medications that are so vital to protecting the health of our parents and our children.
I've noticed that Adderall wasn't included in the list of new medications that you'll be stockpiling. I'm just curious why that is, especially considering that you're going to ask the Adderall shortage.
Sure. No, go ahead.
So as we went and started sort of developing, and to your point, our cash does not, it's kind of a fluid discussion based on what needs, and we'll take that feedback from the pharmacies as well. But we looked at some of the things that we had to look at. What is the greatest number of need for the greatest amount of people? And so that's where we started. Amoxicillin was part there, as Bill sort of mentioned, that no one knew why amoxicillin was gone, but that was one of the first domino effects that became the problematic for the next set of antibiotics, and then became the problem for the next set of antibiotics. So we looked at key domino areas. We looked at even, if you were to Google top medications that change the longevity of life in society, and you'll see number 1, the invention or discovery of penicillin. Number 2, insulin. Life changers. So we worked on things that could hit the greatest amount of good. Number 2, change the lives of people and we can't live without. And then we tried to also go back to, I don't know if anybody's ever taken a CPR class, airway, breathing, and circulation. If you don't have airway and breathing taken care of, hence albuterol, then you can't progress to the other. So that's where we started from. Not to mean that conversations can't change, or be added, but that's where we started from for those particular reasons.
Partnering with Canada, because I'm seeing that India and China are their main suppliers.
Right, to my whole point of going, that we're all kind of going from the same source, but the greatest consumer of all medications is the United States. And why have barriers to being able to use all the tributaries that we can? So we're just saying, hey, open the gates to any place that we can possibly help us, especially in this immediate short-term area. So, thank you, sir.
That was an excellent question. The reason that we cannot do that is because it's a controlled substance. But the bigger point, because when I was asked about this a week ago, I'm kind of new to all this, but very, very concerned about the process, what's happened, where we are. The problem with controlled substances, and Sarah Hahn lives and breathes this every day, and thank you for letting us invade your pharmacy, is the fact that the controlled substances mess is a DEA concern. It's because the opioid crisis that occurred has put a limit now on the production. So that's the concern, and what's happened is that it's the governance concern restricting supply that's impacting patients who are using these medications, not that some people, their intended concern, the restraints on supply are impacting people who are using it legitimately for learning. My daughter's teacher. It's impactful. That's a DEA piece. We're not able to do controlled substances. It would be a nightmare. But that's an excellent point, and something that needs to be addressed. Thank you.
One question, does one shortage of one medicine affect the next, to the next, to the next? Have you seen any of that in your pharmacy?
The amoxicillin pediatric was a concern. So as we walk through the amoxicillins, and still no answer as to why. That's been around forever. It's not expensive. Nothing has changed in amoxicillins forever. The problem is that as soon as the amoxicillin went away, we started using augmentin, cephalosporins, other medications that are a little more broader spectrum, and then you have concerns about over crushing the situation. So yes, there are concerns with that. The concern with the attention deficit drugs is there really isn't much solution to that. So we've got a lot of people calling, and when we face this, and Sarah does it every day, we're trying to explain this to the public, and it's very difficult because it's not that we're saying you can't have the medication, it's just that we don't have it, and we're trying to get the wholesalers who have been fined $17 billion for the opioid concern They are really fine tuning this, and something that I've talked to Gary Shannon of the Board of Pharmacy about too, as long as we're waving flags around, is that we need to make the DEA aware of the fact that they need to back off the wholesalers so we can in turn free up these medications. Thank you.
Governor, with the families such as the Griffins that have been in this business for years and years, decades, what is it that the state can actually do that they can't do that will make things better?
Well, I think we can help with setting up other facilities that are willing to have a cache for us, a stockpile, so that they're not continuously stressed to provide that service and to work with the state to be the sole resource that we have. We can be advocates for fixing the problem. By talking about it today here, South Dakota will become aware, but also we know that other governors may pay attention and start leading their voices to change in Washington, D.C. My hope is that those leaders in D.C. that have the ability to weigh in on this issue will, and we'll continue to educate them on why it's such a critical need for us to address it today. A lot of the bureaucracy within the FDA can be fixed simply with a decision that is made there and within some of their regulations, and so we're hopeful that continuing to build the momentum of educating people about what a real risk this is to the security of the United States is going to lead to a long-term solution that will fix the problem. I think the general population of South Dakota, the average mom or dad or grandpa and grandma would be shocked to know that we don't provide for our own medications. I've talked about this consistently about when another country controls our food, when they control our supply chain that we need to live, that's when they control us. So knowing that countries such as China and India literally control our medications and we're susceptible to that, that is something that I think most South Dakotans would say needs to be fixed and should be important to do.
You mentioned that the FDA is a roadblock. What's specific?
You know, I would say within the FDA, everybody knows the FDA is slow to react and slow to change and be responsive to needs on the ground, just their approval process, the regulation within it. Bill could speak to that, I'm sure, on the FDA's inability to change. They're recently now just starting their inspection process in the country of India so that we actually know what those manufacturing facilities look like and if they are generating generics that are what they say they are according to the label. You know, I would say within that organization, the bureaucracy and slow decision-making process is what the problem is. Bill, do you want to share more details?
It's not that the FDA isn't responsive, it's just that the problem is a much more dynamic problem. It's a business problem. It's when the commoditization has occurred to the product that it isn't financially viable to manufacture a product in the United States, it gets relocated. Same thing with steel, same thing with electronics, everything else. It's just that when it's something as life-saving as pharmaceuticals, you want to make sure you maintain that. So it's much more than the FDA. It's pretty much a Washington and a business model that we need to work at, because I don't think the general public has an awareness of this, nor really should they. But when it gets to the point where it's starting to impact our supply chain, I think we need to raise awareness. So it's not easy. If it were easy, it would have been fixed. But I think the tension needs to be played, and that's what we're doing here, is making sure that people realize that we need to protect our own vital medications. They work.
Yep. Yeah.
Are you surprised that they have no comment? Do you think that maybe just what they're
No, if you remember, I served in Congress for 8 years. I served on the Ways and Means Committee, which has jurisdiction over all healthcare issues. So I was up to my eyebrows every day in healthcare decisions and working with the FDA and their processes. And many times in D.C., when it comes to policy, there's plenty of lobbyists up there to make sure no change ever happens. I think the FDA, runs into that all the time as well. But if they were to champion changing our supply chain, adding more transparency to it, let people know what is happening in our supply chain, I think then the businessmen and women that are in this industry would recognize the need for diversity and for us not to have all of our eggs in one basket. Yes.
I just don't think I quite understand exactly what was happening with the stockpiles. Is it like a room that would be in the pharmacy with a bunch of jars, but the consideration of like expiration dates, or is it fun?
Correct. It's actual medications, and we'll let Bill or Melissa speak to it, whoever would like to. Yep.
It's in our warehouse, so we use a central fill, our warehouse for our product distribution. So that's where we're able to exchange the product, like I mentioned earlier, keep the products fresh so they don't expire. So now we're going to replicate it in numerous other sites, and we'll do the one in Aberdeen too. So we'll work through, again, this is a very fluid discussion, and what medications we decide on and how we're going to use them, that's still being discussed. The point being, the bigger point is the fact that we just want awareness to be made of the fact that we do have some issues we need to work through.
We've seen the last several years the need for medications when we have something, a virus, hit the state of South Dakota and not having it available. We spent thousands of hours on the phone trying to get necessary medical equipment, prescriptions, supplies for our people to take care of them throughout the COVID pandemic and since then. So it'll be the same type of decision-making process that we'll use to decide what medications will be stockpiled, how much we can have there and keep cycling through to keep it fresh and make sure that we can protect the population of South Dakota and not have to be reliant on finding it in another state or another country when a shortage occurs that day. Yep. Yes, yes, it is, definitely. The reliability of those suppliers and those manufacturers, the reliability of the consistency of that medication, that they actually are manufacturing what they say they're manufacturing, and then the cleanliness of that medication, that it doesn't have some kind of toxicity or contaminants that are included in it as well. All of those have been problems in different types of situations over the years, and that manufacturer should be accountable for the type of product that they deliver and that it is the product that they deliver. Well, the FDA currently conducts those inspections and should be doing that. We need transparency in that process, and for me, as an individual, as a mother, as a grandmother, would like to know that I have that information available to me, that if this specific drug comes from this manufacturer, that it is safe and it is something that what they say it is truly is the medication and the dose that my child or grandchild is supposed to have. Sure.
I'm just curious, this past winter, how many times were you telling parents, like, hey, we don't have amoxicillin, we don't even have penicillin for those who aren't abortions?
Far more than I ever would have hoped. In my years of doing this, this last winter was rough. It's hard to tell someone that I can't provide you what you need for your child. Luckily, we were able to work with other pharmacies, hospital systems, other ways. We got to a point where we were making amoxicillin from the capsules that we could get to make sure that it was available. So unfortunately, yes, we spent a lot of time on the phone in front of parents telling them those kind of things, but hopefully that's not something we relive. So.
And also, how bad is the shortage of epinephrine?
Epinephrine at this point, we are able to get what we need. So.
And to be clear, the stockpile is generated to prepare us for our winter season when we would have a higher need for a lot of these medications. Right now we recognize that in the summer is the time to prepare for that season when we have a lot of these drugs that become more necessary for people.
Obviously, when you're outsourcing the production to other nations, because of the cost, some manufacturers don't find it profitable.
Correct.
Manufacturing here, that's why they're outsourcing. So would artificial stockpiling of this affect the pricing? Have you studied that at all?
Well, the amount of stockpile that we will have will not affect the price. I would say that if every state started to do this and if their policy changed at the federal level to prioritize manufacturing our own prescriptions here and bring our pharmaceuticals back home, that would be a game changer. I know it'd be more expensive to get it established here, but once we've generated our own medications in this country, I think it would be much safer and it would become more affordable because it would be more proliferated. Oftentimes with these other medications, we're running into supply chain issues, not necessarily just the cost of the manufacturing. It's can we even get it here because of other disruptions that are happening around the world. Other questions or comments? All right. Thank you for being here. We appreciate it. We'll stick around if you have any other questions, if you want to follow up with those that are here. Again, Mark, thank you so much for having us. And Bill, thank you for your expertise, and Secretary for all your hard work, and Sarah for stepping in and hitting a home run. We appreciate we grabbed her and she came on up, and thank you for all that. Have a wonderful day.
Good.